Here to handicap the best from week 2 in college football. This is the Phil Steele Show, streaming live at CS Now Tweets on Twitter, Facebook audio page, the Learfield audio page on Facebook, as well as the Varsity channel. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube Live. You can find us all there. And if you're listening to the College Sports Now podcast feed, you're getting us after we went live. You know where to find us. In living color, every single Thursday, 1 o'clock Eastern is where we will be. Phil Steele, the man, the myth, the legend, the unicorn of all unicorns, live in the flesh, 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern every single Thursday during the college football season. Author of College Football's Most Accurate Preview magazine, on Twitter at PhilSteele042. I'm Kyle Schasberger at Kyle Schas. Trip Hurd is at Trip Hurd. And Phil, before we turn the page completely, you look extra handsome here ahead of week 2, by the way, I might add. You don't look worn out or exhausted at all after the 82 games that we had in week 1, but I don't believe I'm playing prisoner to the moment, but my goodness, Phil, did week 1 deliver?
Oh, it sure did. I think it's 2 straight years that week 1 has delivered. Last year we had some pretty exciting games as well, all the way up to even Georgia Tech was giving Clemson a game on Monday night until the fourth quarter of that one. But the Florida State LSU, a lot of great games, and all the big matchups, with the exception of Georgia against Oregon, pretty much lived up to the billing. So it was a great weekend.
Started with the backyard brawl on Thursday. Just so much drama, so much thrilling action throughout. Yes, even the 7-3 win for Iowa, where their defense outscored their offense with 2 safeties over South Dakota State. You had Florida-Utah, which probably was the game of the weekend, but not so fast. Tripp with his seminal moment coming late on Sunday night. Florida State covering and beating LSU in the Superdome.
Hey, Tripp, as a Florida State fan, where would you rank that as far as all-time wins?
We've had some big ones over the year, Phil. I'm not sure, but that was a necessary win. We had to have it. I mean, if we're turning the corner, if we're trying to get back to where we used to be, we needed that one big.
Audio courtesy of the Florida State Radio Network. That's Jeff Colhane calling just his second game as the voice of the Florida State Seminoles, too, replacing the legendary Gene Deckeroff. So, yeah, quite the moment. I was laboring through my Labor Day, trying to catch up on some sleep on Monday, but I was in a bad place at 11 a.m. waiting for an hour for breakfast on Monday as all the restaurants here in Winston-Salem were packed. So, Phil, I know you're replenished. You've rehydrated. Tripp is feeling himself. That is your seminal moment. We're going to talk no more Florida State for the rest of the show. So, sorry, Tripp. Hopefully you have more to bring to the table. Be sure that you do interact with us, though, before we hit this week's slate of games. At PhilSteele042 is where you can find Phil. At CS Now Tweets is where you can find us. Interact with us in any way you can. Drop some picks, mention, favorite, retweet, follow. We're going to give you an opportunity to win a free subscription of Phil Steele Plus that's valued at $99 for next year. So you've got 13 more opportunities here throughout this season. Phil Steele Plus, you can have access to all the same information that Phil has. That's individual game trends, exclusive stats and trends, access to all FBS team pages, even the FCS ones, 128 team pages, and the NFL starts tonight. You got 32 of those as well, with the Bills favored by 2.5 at the reigning Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams. So Tripp and I are diehard Bears fans, Phil, so hopefully we aren't too obnoxious throughout this show or throughout the season, because the Bears are going to cover every single game. They're going 17-0 during the regular season, en route to the first Super Bowl in my lifetime. Tripp, I think you were around the first one, but you might have been in diapers.
Yeah, 4 years old. Feels like 85, baby.
So no college football games of significance, Phil. Let's get right to it with the NFL starting tonight, unless you want to handicap Missouri State again on the Thursday night docket, taking on Tennessee Martin. They're favored by 14. But let's jump to one of 2 games on the docket Friday, Phil, and that's Louisville at UCF. The Knights favored by 5 and a hook. Louisville looked like straight garbage playing at the Dome against Syracuse over the weekend. What's your read? You like a side here Friday night, Louisville at UCF?
Yeah, this is a tough game for me to call because Louisville is not as bad as they looked against Syracuse in the opening game of the season. I think you'll see Malik Cunningham be a much different quarterback this week. Tyon Evans at running back, I thought impressed, the Tennessee transfer. But UCF is my top group of 5 team this year. So they did well against South Carolina State in the opener. John Rice Plumlee, the Ole Miss transfer, throwing for over 300 yards, nearly rushing for 100. I think it's going to be a great game. It's tough to go against UCF in the bounce house. I think it'll be a higher scoring game. That would probably be my lean there, would be to go with the over. But as far as the side goes, I like UCF to win the game, but Louisville's going to make it a game. Should be another exciting game.
The over has ticked up just a tad, too, since the beginning of the week. 61.5, 7:30 ESPN2 on Friday. UCF favored by 5.5. Okay, let's go to maybe the biggest, sexiest game here on the Week 2 docket, which does underwhelm in totality compared to Week 1, but that's, tradition of sorts that's come to be expected. But top-ranked Alabama is going on the road to Austin to take on Texas. Crimson Tide are favored by 20. Was my last check. I don't know if Texas has ever been a 20-point underdog at home. 65.5 is the total. 12 o'clock on Fox. Texas leads all time 7-1-1. Alabama winning the last meeting, the 2010 National Championship. Phil, 20? Too much for Bama?
I think it is in this case. And by the way, Kyle, if you ever want to look up anything like that, if the Texas has been a dog, I've got spread histories dating back to 1976 on Phil Steele Plus. So you could just click on that. We'll show it next week when we show a little bit of how Phil Steele Plus operates. But you can actually go back and look all the way to 1976 and see how big what is their biggest time as a home dog. But as good as Alabama looked last week, and as good as Alabama is, let's face it, they may have the best offensive player in the country in Bryce Young. They have the best defensive player in Will Anderson. Figured to be dominant all year. Texas is actually 5-0 against the spread as a double-digit underdog, so they do well in this role. They've got one of the best running backs in the country in Bijan Robinson. It's going to be a fired-up home crowd. And if you watched Alabama last year on the road, they were far from dominant. Remember, they got past Florida by 2. They got beat by A&M, and Auburn should have beat them in the final game of the season had Bigsby run out of bounds. So I like Bama to win the game. There's no doubt there. But I'll take the 20 points with Texas. It wouldn't be one of my top plays of the week. You don't make a lot of money going against Bama, especially in a big game. But I would lean with Texas plus the 20 in that one.
What do you think, Tripp? You on the Bama train, right?
I do kind of like Bama here. Just looking over the last few years, those non-conference matchups that Bama's had, the marquee matchups that they play in. 2020, they didn't have one because it was the COVID year. But last year, Miami, 44-13. 2018, they destroyed Louisville. The year before that, it was my guys, Florida State. Got them back into the show, Kyle. But they just seem to always perform so well against these non-conference teams. And we kind of know Alabama's not going to fall on their face, but I could just see this getting away in the second half and seeing Bama cover it. So I'm leaning towards them, but all my picks kind of go into teasers. So we've got a little room to work with there.
As long as Quinn Ewers doesn't get his Porsche towed away, maybe Texas will have a chance in this one. But I'm leaning Bama as well. Bryce Young, 6 total touchdowns last week. They called off the Dogs at 48-0. Alabama only scored one more touchdown, winning 55-0 against Utah State. Nick Saban, 99-20 in non-conference games all time. Alabama has won 13-14 against the spread against Power 5 competition during the regular season. Let's move to Pittsburgh. 17th-ranked Panthers, 3:30 start on ABC, hosting number 24 Tennessee. Pitt won in Knoxville a year ago by a touchdown fielder. A 6.5-point dog as Tennessee comes to Pitt as the favorites this Saturday.
Yeah, and Tennessee looked great last week. In fact, my computer has them scoring 45 points per game this year. And they got off to that start with 59. But they're not taking on Ball State's defense this week. They're taking on Pitt's defense. Pitt is one of the best defensive lines in the country, an outstanding back seven. And I like the way Keaton Slovis threw the football in his first start. Threw for over 300 yards against West Virginia last week. I think Pitt's going to have a little bit more balance of a run game this year than they did last year with Hammond and Abanconda and Carter. So the other thing that stands out to me is that Pat Narduzzi's 23-15 against the spread as a dog, and he's had 14 outright upsets. Now, my line on this at the start of the year was Pitt -1, -2. They're going to have the big crowd hedge here at home, but the line's been bet up to Tennessee -6, 6.5. So I'm taking Pitt plus the 6.5, and I'll call for the outright upset here.
I like that Pitt pick as well. Pitt hosting an SEC opponent for the first time ever adds intrigue to this. Again, a rematch from last year where Pitt won. Year 2, the Johnny Majors Classic. Tennessee winning in Week 1, covering easily over Ball State 59-10. Tripp, I know this is one of your favorites for the weekend. Big 10, Big 12 showdown for the Cy-Hawk Trophy. This will be the 69th meeting between Iowa and Iowa State. It's going to be in Iowa City at Kinnick. Iowa leads all-time 46-22. They've won 6 straight in the series, including for Iowa, first time as an underdog, Phil. I noted in your magazine last year and won 27-17. It was their first time as an underdog against Iowa State since the year 2000. I think the over-under is a little too high on this one, Phil, considering the lack of points a week ago against South Dakota State. 40.5, but Iowa favored by 3.5. Again, that's more offensive points than what they scored a week ago.
Yeah, and following that up, if you take a look at the series between these two, you would expect a rivalry game to be lower scoring as the teams are tense. And guess what? In the last 17 matchups between these two, the game's gone under the total 15 of the 17 times. So 15-2 to the under. Now, I don't want to overreact to last week when Iowa didn't have an offensive score. In fact, their defense outscored the offense 4-3 last week with a couple of safeties. They've got one of the best punters in the country. Did an amazing job pinning South Dakota State deep in their own end. And South Dakota State's not chopped liver. They were number 2 in the FCS preseason poll. They're an outstanding team. But I like the under as the best play in this one as well. I think Iowa's the better team. Their defense is going to be absolutely dominant. One of the best defenses in the country. Held South Dakota State to 120 yards. I do think Iowa State's quarterback, Hunter Deckers, is a guy that can top Brock Purdy's stats from last year. I think he's going to have a good year. But Iowa's at home. They control the series. I think it'll be a close, low-scoring game. And I was a little surprised this number didn't open up in the 30s as well. I'll take under 40.5 as my best play there.
You like that under, right, Tripp?
I mean, I think it's about 40 points too high. If you could score half a point, that's what I would be leaning towards. But I told you guys 2 weeks ago, it's hard to watch.
4 o'clock, Big Ten Network, 40.5 the total. Iowa given 3.5 to Iowa State. This might be the most consequential game of the weekend. It's an SEC showdown in the swamp between Kentucky and Florida. The Wildcats come in as the 20th ranked team in the land. The Gators all the way up to number 12 after that win over Utah at the swamp this past weekend. 7 o'clock game on ESPN. 6 points for Florida, a little fishy perhaps. I know Kentucky, Phil, I did a check before we started to check the status of Chris Rodriguez. It looks like he's not on the depth chart for Kentucky, still a suspension or not playing because of an off-season incident. So Mark Stoops might be undermanned here heading into Gainesville this weekend.
Yeah, and I think when you take a look at the team, I mean, Anthony Richardson, my knock on him last week was just the experience factor. His big games came against weaker teams last year. He had a pretty big game against Utah last week. Very impressed with Anthony Richardson. And overall, I think Florida's a very underrated team. I had on my number 2 most improved team in the country. I had Florida finishing ahead of Kentucky in the SEC East standings this year, whereas everybody else had Kentucky coming in second. Now, Kentucky's got Will Levis. But remember, last year, Will Levis, 8 of the 12 games, did not even throw for 200 yards. And as you mentioned, Rodriguez probably out for Kentucky. I think Florida's the better team. And if you go back to last year, in last year's game, Florida had a 382 to 224-yard edge. They out first down them 21-13. The game changed with that blocked field goal for a touchdown, and Kentucky pulled out the win in front of a rabid home crowd. I think the Swamp's going to be fired up again after that big win against Utah. They're believing in Coach Billy Napier. I like Florida minus the points in this one, and get it now while it's under 7.
Yeah, I think that's a low line. What do you think, Tripp? I mean, 29-5 at home against Kentucky. 31-game win streak was snapped overall just in 2018. I mean, Florida has dominated Kentucky. Now you got an undermanned Kentucky team coming into the swamp. So the last time that happened, Tripp, that the Gators are facing a ranked Kentucky team, 2007. Florida was 14, Kentucky was 8. The Gators won 45-37.
I thought Florida looked at Richardson, I thought he looked really good. Florida looked really good against Utah. The thing that jumps out to me here is why is it only 6? Is that right?
Well, it's because Kentucky was ranked higher coming into the season. The actual line on this game prior to the year would have been probably pick 'em, maybe even Kentucky a slight favorite.
Yeah.
Vegas is not going to overreact to 1 week's action, so they're a little bit slower moving on the line. I think the line's priced where it should be for the game because of the fact Kentucky and Florida was basically pick 'em prior to the year.
Yeah, that was kind of my question for you. Is that's why I noted in there like a fishy line. I wasn't sure if to a guy like you who handicaps games, does that number jump out or did it look about right? And you answered my question there because to me, watching the two teams, Kentucky didn't look so great last week. Florida looked pretty good, taking down a top 10 team. I just thought it would have been a little higher.
Yeah, and it actually opened up in the week 4.5, and has been bet up to 6. So Vegas did their usual adjustment on the game, taking it from pick maybe +1 to -4, and it's actually been bet up because folks like you watched both games and said well, Florida's going to win this thing.
All the more reason to do your homework and get in early when you can. Take advantage of a line, being lower than what it might become later in the week. Number 11, Oklahoma State and Arizona State, 7:30 on ESPN2 Saturday. The Pokes favored by 11.5. The total is 58. These two teams meeting for the first time since 1993. They combined for 98 points in their Week 1 wins, Phil. And Spencer Sanders, he showed up against Central Michigan. He had 6 total touchdowns.
Yeah, that game was actually 51-15. So if you're a Central Michigan fan, you're very thankful for the second half where they came back and pulled within 14 points and even had the ball at the end of the game down 14. So that was very interesting. But Sanders, as you mentioned, 4.0 ratio last week. He looked great and also ran the ball for 57 yards. Arizona State, I don't think is as bad as folks think they're going to be this year. They lost a lot in the offseason, the transfer portal. But Xavier Valladay, the Wyoming running back, I loved watching him at Wyoming the last couple of years. He had 7.7 yards per carry last week. Emory Jones looked decent. I do think Oklahoma State's a better team, and they're at home, but it's probably going to be a higher scoring game. Not wild about either side in this one. Probably lean with the over.
It'll be the fourth meeting between the two. Arizona State has won the last 2 in the series. Let's go to BYU, Mormons and Baptists. This will be a rematch of a game last year in Waco where Baylor won by 2 touchdowns. Future Big 12 matchup. These two will tangle at 10:15 Eastern Time on ESPN. BYU is giving 353.5 is the total. The Bears, their furthest trip west since 2006 during the regular season when they played at Wazoo. This should be plenty fun. Ranked on ranked matchup under the lights late night between the Cougars and the Bears, Phil.
Yeah, BYU's game last week got delayed by a couple hours. Took a little starch out of the home crowd, and then they got an 85-yard run on the first play by Christopher Brooks for a touchdown, and then poured it on USF. Looked very impressive. This may be Satake's best team yet. He's got 17 or 18 returning starters coming back. Jaron Hall's looked great at quarterback. So this is a very solid BYU team. They're at home. They've got the altitude. They've got the grass advantage as well. A lot to like about BYU, and that's why they're favored by 3.5 in this one. But I'll go back to last year's game. Watching that one close, I thought Baylor had the speed advantage in that one. In fact, they led by 21, and BYU got a late touchdown to make it a 14-point game. That speed advantage is not gone. Neither is the line of scrimmage edge. I like BYU's line of scrimmage, but Baylor's got top 10 offensive line, top 10 defensive line, and Blake Shapen gives them a passing threat at the quarterback position, something they probably lacked last year. He had 17 of 20 in the opener. So with the line of scrimmage, with the speed advantage, I'm going to go with Baylor plus the points in this one. Low-scoring game. I think worst-case scenario, Baylor loses by 3. So I definitely like the Bears plus the points in a possible upset.
So those are the main entrees from the main course here as we move on to where we can find more value throughout Week 2 in college football. And I want to go to Nashville, to Music City, where number 23 Wake Forest is going to have the return of Sam Hartman under center. The Deacs favored by 12.5. That's up close to 4, I think right at 4 points from what the line opened up at before the news that Hartman would return from a medical condition that had him sidelined to start the year. The starting quarterback for the Demon Deacons, 65.5 is the total. 12 o'clock SEC Network. The Deacs and Commodores, Phil, little SEC ACC throwdown.
Yeah, and this is interesting. The line has been all over in this game. If you would have bet this thing in the preseason, Wake Forest would have been about a 17-point road favorite. But as impressive as Vanderbilt has been the first 2 games, and I mean, Mike Wright's got 6 touchdowns passing, 4 touchdowns running, 247 yards. He's averaging over 10 yards a carry. He's been dynamic. So the over is worth a look in this one. But I lean with Wake Forest minus the points. I think we're looking at a Wake team that was a ACC title contender last year. Vanderbilt, meanwhile, as great as they've looked, they took on a depleted Hawaii team. And last week against an FCS squad in Elon, they gave up 495 yards. They were actually outgained in that game by 71 yards. Only won it by 11 at home. I think Wake's got the better team. It will be a high-scoring game. So once again, lean a little bit with the over. But with their start quarterback Sam Hartman back, I like Wake minus the points in this one.
Yeah, I was going to say you kind of answered my question for you right off the bat there. If you could have gotten 17 earlier, just imagine what it would have been if Hawaii could have kept it close with Vandy. I mean, we would have been looking at something even bigger, right, Phil?
Right. That's correct. Yes, absolutely.
Deeks have won 5 of 6 road openers straight up, 4-2 against the spread. That little nugget, of course, from the Phil Steele College Football Preview. Make sure you pick that up. Still plenty of time. PhilSteele.com to interact with us at CS Now Tweets. Your chance to win a free subscription to Phil Steele Plus, valued at $99. That's at CS Now Tweets. Thank all of you watching us live on YouTube, Facebook, and at CS Now Tweets. For Wake Forest, too. First SEC road game since 2013. So it's been a while. 8th-ranked Notre Dame hosting Marshall. The Irish tumble just a couple of spots after playing Ohio State well, which Phil and I both saw coming a week ago. If you paid attention to us, watched the show, we were all over Notre Dame as 17-point underdogs. This will be the first meeting between the Herd and the Fighting Irish. First Sun Belt opponent for Notre Dame. 10 straight home opening wins for the Irish. However, they have not covered in their last 2 games. Notre Dame favored by 20 and the hook. Phil.
Yeah, Notre Dame's on a nice little spread run during the regular season. They've actually won 8 in a row against the spread in the regular season. So I always say when you play on a streak, you can win many times, you lose only once. They were super impressive in the opening game of the season. Now, my biggest question mark for Marshall was the fact their star running back, Ali, was injured in the offseason, and he's questionable to even return this year. But I like the way that Ethan Payne ran the ball, had 113 yards, and Kalen LeBourne ran the ball for 102 yards, a Florida State transfer. So it looked pretty good there. And then Henry Colombi, who saw time at Utah State, saw time at Texas Tech, threw for over 200 yards in the opener and hit 24 or 26 passes. Now, granted, it was Norfolk State, but I thought it was a very impressive opening game for Marshall. You got to feel Notre Dame's entire offseason was based on Ohio State. Meanwhile, Marshall's entire offseason was probably based on Notre Dame. So I think the situation really favors Marshall. I don't want to go against that 8 straight regular season spread wins for Notre Dame, but I also don't want to go against Marshall, who's got the better situation. And I think Marshall's an underrated team this year. So this is one I'm staying away from.
That game is going to be on Peacock. Make sure you got your Peacock subscription to be able to follow the Fighting Irish 2:30 on Saturday. And yeah, just to clarify, the last 2 home opening games for Notre Dame, they have not been able to cover, but 8 straight on the regular season that they have covered overall. Arkansas State and Ohio State. I think Tripp removed one game for this game. I wanted to talk Houston, Texas Tech, but Phil, Tripp is all over the Red Wolves and the Buckeyes. Huge number, 44.5, 69 is the total. 12 o'clock, Big Ten Network. This will be the 3rd Sun Belt opponent all time for Ohio State. First meeting between these two, and Arkansas State's got to be feeling themselves, right, Phil? Beating Grambling 58-3 in Week 1. Now Butch Jones heading to Columbus.
Yeah, and speaking of Florida State, how about James Blackman, the quarterback, another Florida State transfer, 15 of 20 last week for 75% completions. Johnny Lang ran the ball well, over 100 yards rushing. Arkansas State's back to where they used to be, right? Well, not so fast. And I think when you look at Ohio State, remember during the offseason, Ryan Day said, we're not happy with last year. Yeah, we won the Rose Bowl. Yeah, we won 11 games, but we need to win the national title is when we'll be happy. I think the defense with Jim Knowles continues to play hard, continues to play with effort. I could even see a potential shutout here for that. And offensively, the nation's #1 offense with 3 Heisman Trophy candidates, although Jackson Smith and Jigba probably not going to play here, is it an offense that really needs to get untracked. And I think they do this week. So after being held to 21 points last week, I look for Ohio State's offense to get untracked. I like the Buckeyes to win this one by 50 or something this week. I'm taking Ohio State minus the 44.5. And I'm the one that slid that in there because I was really torn on Texas Tech Houston, Kyle. It was one of those games where I couldn't really pick a side either way.
Look at Phil doing his homework, getting on the dock trip. I not to say I didn't want that or expect that, but I'm impressed. You know, we do a lot of the legwork to help tee him up and make sure he's got all the information he needs ahead of time. But he's contributing. I love it.
I mean, really, you keep blaming me for taking stuff off the dock. It's been Phil the whole time. But I think Ohio State might be a little bit like Houston this week. It doesn't seem like they're getting a lot of respect. I mean, they're going to score 80 points in this game. This will probably be a complete no-sweat lock. I'm locked in on it. And I think Houston is kind of the same way. They beat UTSA, a team that won a conference last year, and they go down in the rankings. I just don't understand how winning a tough game on the road like that you should be penalized for it. So I think I'm looking for big weeks from both Ohio State and Houston this week.
If you're looking at Houston this week, I want to throw out a nugget that you may not know. If you watched the Texas Tech Murray State game last week, which I'm sure you both did, you know that at the half, Murray State's quarterback got injured. He had like 200 yards passing in the first half. In the second half, their backup quarterback hit 1 of 8 passing for 1 yard, and they had 35 yards of total offense. So that game was a little bit closer than the final score would indicate, especially if Murray State's quarterback would have stayed healthy.
Texas Tech also dealing with quarterback injuries, right? Tyler Shuck is going to miss this game and even the game against NC State, which is going to, limit their chances of knocking off the Wolfpack and getting an upset coming up. I think that one is next week. So, and for Houston, Trip, they had to overcome a 14-point deficit against UTSA. I know the Roadrunners were the darlings a year ago, but still, it's UTSA. I think the expectations are much higher for Houston and what they can do this year. The American favorite, a team that many think can be the Group of 5 representative in the New Year's 6 bowl game. So to be able to end that 10-game winning streak for UTSA and do it the way they did with Clayton Tune over the top, 2-point conversion, 3 overtimes, still good enough to stay in the rankings, but I can understand dinging them. And I don't think Arkansas State scores against Ohio State, just to put a bow on that contest. OSU limited Notre Dame 72 yards, 5 first downs, no points in the second half alone. Just an out-of-this-world defensive effort. They're going to be certainly determined again here next week, and I think that offense will get going for sure. Okay, Ann Arbor, 4th-ranked Michigan. Michigan shoots up to number 4 after just completely waxing Colorado State, favored by 51 points. The number just continues to grow. Ohio State, 44.5-point favorite. Michigan, 51 against Hawaii. They beat them 63-3 in the opener back in 2016. 8 o'clock, Big Ten Network. Do you even bother with a game with a line this big, Phil?
I personally wouldn't, just because a lot of things can happen late in the game. You take a knee, backups are playing, things like that. But really, if you are going to play this game, there's only one way to look, and that's Michigan. I got to go against Hawaii every week of the season until they actually show me something. Granted, Braden Schrager looked much better last week against Western Kentucky than he did in the opener against Vanderbilt. But I think when you take a look at Hawaii this year, they're a depleted team. They have a first-year head coach. They're in a massive rebuilding year. And going to the Big House, last week, Michigan put on 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter against Colorado State. That means they're still trying to score in the second half of the game with that quarterback battle. So I'd have to go with Michigan in this one if you're going to play it.
3 previous meetings, combined score 138-30. Now, it seems like a lot, but that's just an average margin of victory of 36 points. They've got to hit 51 to cover Saturday night, 8 o'clock, Big Ten Network, Michigan and Hawaii. Mississippi State at Arizona. Super bizarre non-conference showdown between those two in the desert in Tucson. Mike Leach 4-2 against Arizona while he was at Wazoo. The Bulldogs are giving 10.5. The total is 60. 11 o'clock start on Fox Sports 1. Last time Arizona played an SEC opponent back in 2006, they got hammered 45-3 by LSU. But Phil, Arizona, I think, surprised both of us last week going to San Diego State and spoiling the brand-new stadium, Snapdragon Stadium, and beating the Aztecs as soundly as they did.
Yeah, a couple notes. Going back to the Michigan game for one moment, that's the largest line, by the way, in our records for a Michigan game. The previous high was against UMass in 2012, when they were minus 45. So massive line for Michigan. Now, the interesting thing about the Arizona-San Diego State game was there's really no coverage from the sun anywhere in Snapdragon Stadium. By the second quarter, there's practically nobody in their seats due to the heat and humidity, or the heat, I should say, of California, and so there's home field edge for San Diego State was lessened. But what I like is the fact that Arizona took on a similar defense to what they're facing this week. In other words, the 3-3-5 that San Diego State runs, much like what Mississippi State runs. That's an advantage to have. I thought Mississippi State last week was in a great situation at home against Memphis, playing with revenge after losing a game they shouldn't have lost at Memphis the previous year. Memphis being 0-8 against the spread on the road. There was a lot of factors in Mississippi State's favor last week. They took care of that business. I think Arizona's dangerous. I love what Jacob Cowing did at the receiver spot. Had close to 200 yards receiving. They've also got McMillan, one of the top receivers out there. Jaden DeLora looked great at QB. Add it all up, I'm probably leaning with Arizona plus the points over Mississippi State, but not one of my big plays of the week because, let's face it, Mississippi State's got more talent both sides of the football, but it is late night for them.
And you also wonder, too, with LSU on deck, a trip to Baton Rouge, maybe not exhaust yourself too much or reveal too much. And again, that late night hour could affect you in the body clock and everything that goes in. So, yeah, not a strong feeling either way from me either. Memphis at Navy. CBS Sports Network, 3:30 on Saturday. The Tigers favored by 6 in the hook. 50.5 is the total number. Memphis, as you indicated, in that last game, falling to Mississippi State, a huge revenge game for the Bulldogs. Memphis now having to get up off the mat and visit Annapolis to take on Navy. What's your read on those two getting together 3:30 Saturday?
Yeah, and this one I really like Navy plus the points. A home underdog in this one. Navy is a great home dog to begin with. They're 35-20-1 versus AAC foes since 2015 overall. They're 11-6-1 as a home dog, and they also do well off a straight-up loss. Niamatololo is 18-8-1 off a straight-up loss. Then factor in that Memphis has lost 9 straight games against the spread on the road. I love playing on streaks, and you play on them until you can win many times, you lose only once. But, another big factor I like here is not only is Memphis traveling for a second straight week, but last week their defense had to gear up for the air raid. So they are thinking pass defense, pass defense, pass defense. Now, this week, it's the option. Can you imagine being a defensive player and having these two vastly different offenses to prepare for while going on the road a second straight week? So Navy's, I think the line's up there at 6.5 because let's face it, Navy lost to an FCS team. They're horrible, right? I have seen through the years, probably over the last 10 years, that teams that lose to FCS teams get a lot of line value the next week. That's what we're going to see with Navy this week. And last week, they didn't play that bad. They had a 319-202 yard edge against a very good Delaware team. So the problem last week was turnovers. They had four fumbles in the game and lost them all. I like Navy to possibly pull the upset home, but definitely like the home dog Navy in this one.
Midshipman with an open week after week 2. So week 3 is open for Navy, and they are 5-2 against the spread, too, in the last 7 against Memphis. Let's try and get a couple of more in before we get your top 3 plays. Many of these games that we've talked about, you're going to give me where you're falling most heavily on from the 3 that we've discussed, and then Tripp's teaser and a sicko pick before we say goodbye. I think that's a new thing we need to implement. I've got one game in particular that I think we'll get a chuckle out of from Phil. But USC and Stanford, we've got to talk about the Trojans. The Lincoln Riley era is off and running in a big way over Rice. 3 pick sixes. Rice moved the football in the first quarter, but USC was able to pull away. Now they're going to get tested on the farm, taking on Stanford. 7:30 Pac-12 Network. Stanford is a 8.5-point underdog, but this was the game a year ago, Phil, that got Clay Helton fired. Now USC is going back. They're going to play Stanford, favored by 8.5 points. What's your read for those two?
Well, USC is my number 1 most improved team in the country this year, so you'd automatically think I'm taking USC on a weekly basis, but this is a great situation for Stanford. As you touched on, Kyle, last year Stanford went into USC and pretty much controlled that game. Came out of there with a 42-28 win. Coach Helton got fired. Now, this year, they're a vastly improved team. Defensively, they're vastly improved. Last week, they held Colgate to 218 yards. And offensively, Tanner McKee's one of the quarterbacks that, nobody talks about him, but he could be one of the top quarterbacks for next year's draft. Hit 22 at 27 for 308 yards. E.J. Smith, Coach Shaw told me he was very high on him this year, rushed for 118 yards last week. And as you touch on, I don't think USC was as good as 66-14. Rice gave him a little bit of a game early. They got 3 interception returns for touchdowns. That's not going to happen here against Tanner McKee. And the game is on the road. So add it all up. I had the game picked to maybe -3. Getting over a touchdown with Stanford at home. I like the Cardinal at home. And once again, a possible upset in this one, even though USC is my #1 most improved team in the country.
They've split their last 10, Stanford winning 42-28. That was the TKO for Clay Helton a year ago. Tripp wants to make sure we talk North Carolina and Georgia State, and why not? Because I left them out of the opening monologue here for the show in terms of games of the weekend that highlighted the 5 days of college football that we had, but arguably they gave us the best game of the weekend. 63-61, they survive in Boone at Appalachian State. 62 total points in the fourth quarter, one off an FBS record. They allowed 42 points just from App State alone in the fourth? I mean, it was a bonkers game on the mound at Kid Brewer Stadium. What do? They got to stay on the road, stay in the Sun Belt, and they got to go to Georgia State. They're going to play at the artist formerly known as Turner Field, whatever the Panthers are calling that now, in Atlanta. They beat Georgia State 59-17 last year. For the game Saturday, 12 o'clock ESPNU, North Carolina favored by 7.5. The total at 64.5, Phil.
Yeah, North Carolina is not a great away favorite. In fact, they're just 1-5 against the spread the last 6 as an away favorite, and lost quite a few of them outright last year. Very impressed with Drake May, though. You know, everybody was wondering who's going to replace Sam Howell. Drake May's put up some remarkable stats this year. He's got 9 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Unfortunately, he's also the team's leading rusher. You'd like to see something a little bit different there. But they have the offense that can score. And meanwhile, Georgia State, not as bad as that score would indicate. Remember, South Carolina got 2 blocked punts for touchdowns in that game. Georgia State actually had a 311 306-yard edge. I am concerned that Darian Granger only hit 7 to 29 passes last week. That would concern me a little bit. I like North Carolina to go on the road and get the win, but I wouldn't lay that many points. I think Georgia State's underrated. North Carolina's putting points up, but this is one of those games I'd stay away from.
Is the over too low now that we've seen UNC kind of? I mean, I know after week 0 you weren't that concerned because Florida A&M, they're not going to show a lot. They're not as amped up for the game, but man, App State, just that has to concern you a little bit for that UNC defense, right?
Yeah, North Carolina sure has looked like an over team their first 2 games. So There's no way I would play the under in a North Carolina game until they show me some defense. And I'll go back to when I talked to Coach Brown. He told me the defensive line looks pretty, but they got to play that way. Well, guess what? They still haven't played that way.
Quarterback did look great.
Oh, yes.
What do you think, Tripp? The worst defense in college football to this point? I'm going to use this as a pivot to my top 3 plays, and we'll get Phil's top 3 for the weekend. But North Carolina ranked 116th in total defense, 6.8 yards per play, 12 offensive touchdowns to 12 opposing touchdowns. That's 499.5 yards per game that they've given up through their first 2 contests. In contrast to the other team on Tobacco Road, right, Tripp? The Duke Blue Devils. Let's put Mike Elko in the Hall of Fame. A 30-0 showing, a shutout of the Temple Owls on Friday night. In week 1, Duke people are glowing. As you can see, I am as well. I'm supporting Mr. Elko and Duke also being 10-point underdogs at Northwestern this weekend. The first of my top 3 plays, Phil, because here's the thing about Duke. This over has moved up. It's ticked up. It's gone from, I think, 9 points to 10 now that Duke has been the underdog. But Duke has won each of the past 3 meetings since 2017 against Northwestern as a 2-point underdog every single year. They've won those 3 since 2017. No reason to believe they won't be able to do it again in Evanston this Saturday. So I love Duke as a 10-point dog, 6th meeting in 8 years against Northwestern.
Yeah, it should be an interesting game. I remember last year Duke led that thing 30-7 at the half, and then Northwestern made a comeback in the second half once Helinski got in there at QB. I'd find it tough to go against Northwestern right now just because I think they're a much improved team. But so I'm just going to pass on that game, and I'll watch it and see if you get that one, Kyle.
Duke 29-9 straight up against the spread against non-con since 2013. So I love Duke plus 10. I'm going to take Pitt plus 6.5. Phil mentioned that was one of his favorites earlier. We'll see if we'll keep that in his top 3. And then Mississippi State, Arizona. I'm going to go over 60. I just think things are going to get plenty weird there on the desert in Tucson under the lights with Mike Leach returned to Pac-12 country. So I do love over 60 between those two, especially the way Arizona played. And now you got the air raid coming in to take on the Wildcats this weekend. So Duke plus 10, Pitt plus 6.5, Mississippi State and Arizona over 60. Phil, what are your top 3 plays for the week?
I'm going to go with 3 home dogs this week, a 3-dog night. I'm going to take Pitt plus the points against Tennessee. Once again, I think they could pull the outright upset. I told you why I like Memphis over Navy over Memphis. Numerous reasons there, including the drastic change of the offense that they're facing. And then Stanford plus the points over USC. So 3 underdogs, all 3 at home. I'm going to go with Pitt, Navy, and Stanford as my best bets this week.
Tripp, you got a teaser for us?
I do. So teaser is off to a rough start. It's 0-2. I know Phil looked at me funny last week. I had 7 teams on the teaser. Maybe that's too many. We can talk about that right now. This week I've only got 5. Last week's teaser only missed by 1 game, and that was those bums at Oregon who went and laid an egg in Atlanta. I mean, just really, really frustrating there. But this week we're coming back. I've got Bama. This is a 7-point teaser. Bama minus 13.5 at Texas. Ohio State gets it rolling this week. I've got them teased down to 37.5 against Arkansas State. I like Houston this week. I'm getting 10.5 at Texas Tech. BYU plus 4 at Baylor. And a little sneaky one here. Northern Illinois teased up to 13 points against Tulsa.
Yeah, Tulsa struggled last week, so that's probably a good play there. Northern, when I talked to Coach Hammock going over Northern Illinois, they were the MAC champs last year. He said this year's team is a touchdown better than last year's team.
I love it. Thank you, Tripp. Let's hope. Let's see if you can hit on your teaser this week. Phil, I do want to slide in a sickos pick each and every week as we move forward, and here's why. Because you see a game like Texas State and FYU, and you think, why the hell would I care about this in any way? But you look at the Bobcats; they were actually a sexy underdog pick a week ago as a 10-point dog playing Nevada. No, it was never close. They turned the ball over 4 times. They ended up losing 38-14, allowed just 278 yards, but still lost handedly. And then FIU is a 14-point favorite against Bryant of all teams. Needed overtime, 38-37. They won. They allowed 349 yards passing. Texas State quarterback Lane Hatcher has thrown for 7,700 yards passing in his career in 28 starts. So I think that FIU passing defense is going to allow Lane Hatcher to go off. Texas State will get right. But just the way those 2 games played out for both Texas State a week ago and FIU, and now they meet in the ring, 7 o'clock, ESPN Plus on Saturday, my sickos pick would be taking Texas State as a 14-point favorite after getting smoked as a 10-point dog the previous week.
And I like that play because Jake Spavital is a guy who's now in his 4th year with the program. As you touched on, they actually had a 15-13 first down edge against Nevada. If they weren't -4 in turnovers, they could easily have won that game. And FIU, meanwhile, is in their 1st year of a total rebuild. I mean, that program lost a lot of talent, has very little back, and they're on the road. They struggled on the road last year. Their average road loss was by about 30 points per game. So I would agree with that with Texas State. I like them this week. So good pick there, Kyle.
Tripp, anything to add before we get out of here? We've been efficient today. It's been the best show you would think it would happen. 3rd week, 3rd time's the charm. I'm ready to go get some grub. I got a hamburger date. Actually, it's a review with my assistant. So
we've almost got enough time to listen to the FSU highlight again. If you guys,
my God, you want to play? You want to play one more time? No, people can rewind on the pod. Yeah, they can. Make sure you do go to philsteele.com though. Check out the website. Digital version of the magazine is available there. Phil Steele Plus, which is a $99 value. If you want to get in the running, to be able to win a free subscription of that valued at $99, interact with us at CS Now Tweets. Drop us some pics, give us some feedback, retweet, favorite, follow us on Twitter at CS Now Tweets. And Inside the Press Box, Phil, which is your newsletter that you put out ancillary to Phil Steele Plus, but there's a lot of great nuggets in that also each and every week.
Yeah, and it's off to a nice 5-2 start this year. So if you do want to get Inside the Press Box, you get Phil Steele Plus for free when you sign up to Inside the Press Box. Just go to philsteele.com and check that out.
College Sports Now, the podcast feed where you can find this afterwards in audio form. Stephen Hartzell, Michael Felder, Wayne Cook, as well as Roddy Jones are all helping to churn out the college football content each and every week. Shows on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Phil Steele even joins Wayne Cook and Stephen Hartzell on the Wednesday edition. Also, Hand in the Dirt, gardening podcasts about football. Follow all of our Learfield-related programming, play-by-play broadcasts, football, coaches shows, archive shows. All of that can be found on the Varsity Network app. Please download it if you haven't already. For Apple and Android, that's the Varsity Network app. So every game you can listen to from Learfield right at your fingertips this weekend, including college football Saturday night. Week 2, Sloan Martin, Mike Golick Jr. are going to Arizona State and Oklahoma State in Stillwater. That'll be a 7:30 start with yours truly in studio this weekend. College Football Blitz, 12 o'clock, Sirius XM, ESPN Radio, wall-to-wall, NFL Red Zone channel-like quality and drop-ins for 12 straight hours. That can be found on the Varsity Network app as well. Stephen Hartzell and Phil Brame host that for 12 hours on Saturday. I think I covered it all. CS Now Tweets is where you can find us. He's Phil Steele. He's at PhilSteele042. Trip Hurd at Trip Hurd. I'm Kyle Schasberger at Kyle Schass. We'll be back to break down Week 3 next week. Be sure to follow the Varsity channel on YouTube Live, Learfield Audio on Facebook, and, of course, us at CS Now Tweets. Until next week, this has been the Phil Steele Show. NFL starts on Thursday, so let's end it with a bear down. We'll see you next week, folks.